Okay, so first of all, this is a broad layout of the presentation. We'll have introduction of why redevelopment is an important subject today. Then we'll talk about different models. Then we have two sections to talk about, and then we'll talk about affordable housing. But majority of my time I would like to spend on different models, the second of the content. Coming to real redevelopment, I think real estate as a subject is something where every member of society, every section of society is eagerly interested, and is eagerly watching what is happening on real estate. And that is the reason we have seen real estate industry going through a lot of changes, whether it is income tax, GST, we have regulatory aspects, we have foreign exchange aspects, we have FDI, ODI regulations relating to real estate. So I think real estate has we also have REITs, InvITs, AIFs. So I think real estate has always been a subject matter of interest for not just professionals, but even entrepreneurs across segments. Coming to redevelopment, what really redevelopment means? Redevelopment refers to the process of reconstruction of residential or commercial premises by demolition of the existing structure and reconstruction of a new structure. So basically, redevelopment is a development on an already existing property. Entering into development agreement does not really vest any title of the land in favor of the developer, but merely authorizes the developer to develop land. Especially in real estate and urban planning, redevelopment is basically replacement, rehabilitation, and repurposing of existing improvement on an already developed site. So this is a broad idea of what redevelopment is. Coming now to the models, and this is the most important aspect of our discussion today. The first is slum rehabilitation. This layout, this diagram broadly shows us how a slum rehabilitation model works. So we have a government, we have a slum. The idea of government is to rehabilitate the into a better locality, a better infrastructure, providing them with better houses to stay. And in that process, this is actually like a win-win situation where government invites tenders from real estate developers, where there is a large piece of land on which the slum residents are inhabiting, and that space is sufficient enough to not only provide a better infrastructure and accommodation to the residents, but also have a space. Sorry, you were saying something. Hello.
No, Rutul bhai, I think you can continue. There was some
Yeah.
just some
Okay. Okay.
sound break.
Okay. So where there is also a space for real estate developer to develop and develop a commercial or a residential project. So coming to this picture, what we have is government invites tenders for slum. Real estate developer applies for that tender. Let's say the tender is awarded to a developer. The consideration in these type of transactions is a combination of extra vacant land and or TDRs. And in lieu of that, a residential accommodation is to be constructed for the slum residents. Now, coming to this is the mechanics that we discussed. Now, before we go further, let's understand how it works. So, there are two ways in which a real estate developer might look at approaching this entire slum rehabilitation transaction. One approach is the construction that a developer would do for slum residents, and the cost incurred for that is nothing but a price that a real estate developer is paying to acquire the second piece or the vacant piece of land and TDR. So for a developer, in terms of accounting, in terms of tax, the construction cost of the houses that they are building is nothing but the staggered payment for purchasing inventory. This is first approach, which is purchase of inventory model, or as we call it, cost approach. The second approach, this is the first approach, and this is also supported by our guidance note. Guidance note clearly mentions on real estate, guidance note clearly mentions that if there is a TDR which is going to be made available to a real estate developer in lieu of a construction being done, then the cost of construction is the value of TDR. And I think similar analogy could be applied for land as well. So going by this model, and I also have an illustrative profit and loss where we can see this. I'll come to that later. But second model, coming to second model, which is as different project model, or as we call as a fair value model. This model is a classic adaptation of recent concepts in India's 115, which deals with real estate, which says that if there is any transaction where consideration is paid in kind, then the recording of that transaction should happen at fair value. Coming to this, what it means is we are shifting from purchase of inventory to a revenue generating commercial project model, whereby what we are saying is even if the real estate developer is constructing residential houses for slum residents, even in that transaction per se, there is a profit element that in itself is a commercial project. So the fair value of vacant land being given to real estate developer and TDRs being given to real estate developer, the aggregate fair value of these two over the cost of construction of residential units for slum residents is nothing but a profit for real estate developer, and that needs to be accounted for depending on which method of accounting the real estate developer is following. So this is the second model. Now let's take an example so that we get better clarity on how this plays out. So let's say government has awarded a contract to a real estate developer for rehabilitation of 10,000 square yards of slum. Now, as we discussed, the land parcel is huge. So residential units for the slum residents, yeah. So residential units for slum residents, let's say, are going to take 6,000 square yards of land. The surplus land of 4,000 square yard, and it depends on how the tender document really specifies these terms, but it could either specify value or it could specify a unit which then has reference to the prevailing circle rate. So that is the reason I've mentioned either it could be a square 4,000 square yard, and let's say the circle rate is X, you multiply that and then you arrive at a value, or there is a specified value given. So surplus land is given, and along with that you also have been given TDRs, which also has a particular specified value, which shall be transferred to real estate developer upon completion of construction of residential units for the slum residents. Now let's also take an assumption that cost of construction for residential units to be provided to slum residents is 4 lakhs. Now, going by the methods or the models that we discussed in the earlier slide, either it could be purchase of inventory or it could be a different project or a fair value method. If let's say we are taking this as purchase of inventory model, what it means is my cost of construction is nothing but the price that I'm paying to acquire the vacant land for development into a subsequent project and TDRs. Going to this, so let's look at a profit and loss account of the real estate developer at the time of rehabilitation. So the first box denotes profit and loss when the construction is over of residential units for slum residents. My construction cost is sitting at the debit of profit and loss statement, which is 4 lakh rupees. And my closing stock, which is nothing but a split of 4 lakh into 4:1, which is 4 lakh and 1 lakh of land and TDR, which is divided into the 4 lakh of cost is divided into two baskets, land and TDR, in the ratio of 4:1. So we have a closing stock of land of 320,000 and TDRs of 80,000, which is nothing but division of construction cost in the ratio of allotment being made to a real estate developer of land and TDR. The closing stock at the end of rehabilitation project automatically becomes opening stock for the new project. So when real estate developer starts construction on of a commercial or a residential project on the new land being allotted, this is an amount which stands as opening stock at the time of starting of new project. So this is option number one. Option number two, which is a fair value method or different project method, where we are taking an assumption that the construction of residential units for slum residents in itself is a real estate project which I have to account for, where the profit and loss account would look similar to this, where I'm saying the fair value, my construction cost is 4 lakh rupees, fair value is 5 lakh, which is 4 lakh plus 1 lakh. So at the end of construction of construction of residential units for slum residents, I would have a receivable to the tune of 5 lakhs from the government, which would be sitting as debtors in my books. And upon completion of residential units, the government would allot land and TDR to me. So debtors would then get converted into inventory, which is the second profit and loss, which is at the opening of new project. Here, the key point to be noted is the profit of 1 lakh is actually recorded at the time of a completion of rehabilitation project itself. In a sense, the overall profit under both these methods remains the same. The only point being the first method, which is the cost method, only differs the taxability of that profit at the time of new project being commenced and new project being then following either a completion contract method or percentage of completion method. And depending on the method of accounting, the profits would be taxed. Whereas here, this profit of 1 lakh, again, depending on the method of accounting, would be taxed at the stage of rehabilitation itself. So this is so far as slum rehabilitation projects are concerned. Now coming to the second type of models, which is society redevelopment, which is a classic case where old societies are approached by real estate developers. The key reason why these projects, we see these projects quite a lot in number these days, is because old societies now are sitting on an area where FSI is quite significant. So they are approached by developers saying that FSI on this particular land is quite significant as compared to what is already being used. So they put up a proposal for developing the or redeveloping the entire society, providing better housing, improved housing, more land to or more space to the existing house owners. And in addition, because of increased FSI, they also get additional construction space for constructing or selling commercial or a residential unit to outside players, outside buyers. So here we have a society, we have a builder, and we have flat owners. The society is approached and the flat owners agree to provide their houses, provide possession of the society to builder, who then demolishes the entire society and constructs a new scheme, new commercial or a residential scheme project, from which a part is given to the existing owners and a part is then sold to outside buyers. And in lieu of that, the flat owners are provided either rental accommodation, a lump sum consideration. So that actually depends on the overall arrangement between the flat owners and the developer. These are key tax implications for society member. Here, what happens is there is a specific section called section 45 5A, which is applicable to individuals and HUF who enter into a specified agreement. Let me go to section 45(5)(a) so that we understand. Notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, which is the charging section of capital gains 45(1), where the capital gain arises to an assessee, being an individual or an HUF, from the transfer of a capital asset, being land or building or both, under a specified agreement, the capital gain shall be chargeable to income tax as income of the previous year, in which the certificate of completion for the whole or part of the project is issued by the competent authority. And for the purpose of section 48, the stamp duty value on the date of issue of the said certificate of his share, being land or building or both in the project, as increased by consideration received in cash if any, shall be deemed to be the full value of the consideration received or accruing as a result of the transfer of the capital asset. So effectively, section 45(5)(a) does not really change the position. It is merely a relaxation provision provided to house owners, saying that capital gain would not be levied on the date of transfer. The transfer might happen whenever section transfer under 247 is triggered, but the taxability will be in the year in which completion certificate is received. So this is in a sense section 45(5)(a), and full value of consideration is the circle rate value or stamp duty value on the date of issue of completion certificate of the share or or the or share in the property or uh, cash consideration or both. Coming here, the tax liability would arise in the year in which completion certificate for whole or part of the project is issued. Largely, we would have seen that under a society redevelopment project, we would have rarely seen a capital gains tax incidence coming. And the key reason for that is the house owners automatically claim Section 54 benefit. So there is a residential house which is transferred and an additional residential house is provided, and automatic section 54 benefit is availed. So largely we do not see section 45(5)(a) resulting into any tax incidence because 54 benefit is availed. Now there are few nuances here. The developers provide rental or compensation to society member. Now, the rental income or the compensation that is received by society members is actually a taxable income for the society member. Now, whatever rent the society member pays is eligible as deduction. There is one more. There is one more judgment. The one that I mentioned is a Mumbai tribunal judgment, but there is one more judgment which says that if there is any extraordinary lump sum consideration, which is nothing but a hardship compensation, is received by a house owner, which is paid by builder, then it should not be taxable. The tribunal takes a view that it is a capital receipt. Now, the tribunal also further elaborates that the compensation received should be reduced from the cost of acquisition of the property. Tax implication for builder developer, the compensation provided for by developer for temporary accommodation, these all are business eligible and allowable as business expenditure. There is no requirement of TDS under 194I when the rental compensation is provided, because that's more of an accommodation expense, and the amount paid is not towards using of any property. So section 194I does not get triggered. Coming to the third model, which is joint development agreement. Joint development agreement is classically an agreement where real estate developer is approached by a landowner saying that I have a piece of land, or real estate developer approaches a landowner saying that you have a piece of land, let us develop it together. They develop that land together, and uh, they enter into what is called a joint development agreement. Now, joint development agreement has two types of compensation or two types of modeling within that. One is an area share model and second is a revenue share model. Under area share model, the landowner gets a specified share in constructed property, which is generally higher than value of land given by the landowner. So the arrangement is, if let's say 100 units are constructed, 40 units are transferred to the landowner as consideration for land transfer in the constructed property. The second is a revenue sharing model where the landowner and developer, they both have sharing in the project revenues and they both have share in profits. So the landowner here does not get any constructed area from developer. All the sales are made by developer and consideration is in the form of share of profit and or share of revenue and consequently share of profit, which is generally higher than value of land given by the landowner. Coming to tax consequences, there are different ways in which land is held. Now, if land is held as capital asset by landowner, and where landowner is an individual or HUF, and the joint development agreement is a registered agreement, then as we discussed, we can have implications under section 45(5)(a). The taxability under 45(5)(a) is in the year in which certificate of completion is received. And the key condition here for applicability of section 45(5)(a) is that part consideration must be in the form of area share and JDA agreement must be registered. So coming here, if it's a pure revenue share, then 45(5)(a) would not apply. In that case, if let's say landowner is an assessee other than individual HUF or any of the conditions under 45(5)(a) are not satisfied, then the taxability will be under 45(1). Section 247 is the key condition to determine the point of transfer. And to analyze section 247 on what transfer is, what transfer means, what are the key constituents, what are the essential ingredients for transfer to trigger, we have a very landmark judgment, recent judgment of Supreme Court of Seshashahi Steel. We'll discuss that judgment in detail, but the concept is when 45(1) is triggered, the taxability is immediately on transfer. It does not have to wait till any further event. Coming to the second limb of the second set of possibilities where the land is held as stock in trade. So it could be possible that the landowner has already converted this land as stock in trade. We again have a specific section dealing with a scenario where a capital asset is converted into stock in trade. If a land is held as stock in trade, then the capital gains are payable in the year in which inventory is sold, and fair market value on the date of conversion is deemed as full value of consideration. So we'll take an example to understand this. Coming now to section 45(5)(a). 45(5)(a), so what now we'll do is we'll go to each of these sections to understand the implications in detail. First, coming to 45(5)(a), it is applicable only to individual HUF, transfer of a capital asset being land, building or both. It has to be under a specified registered agreement allowing other person to develop real estate project. Consideration is in the form of area share with or without part consideration in cash, but a component of area share is a must. Capital gains are, if all these conditions are satisfied, capital gains are chargeable in the previous year in which completion certificate is issued by competent authority. Full value of consideration under section 48 is deemed as stamp duty value of land and building or both on the date of issue of completion certificate, plus if there is any cash consideration that has to be added. If share of project transferred, if let's say any share of project is transferred prior to issue of completion certificate, the landowner will be taxable in the year of transfer itself. Any person responsible for paying to a resident any consideration under agreement referred to under 45(5)(a), there is a specific withholding section under 194 IC which requires 10% withholding at the time of credit or payment. Now let's also go to 194 IC. Notwithstanding anything contained in section 194 IA, any person responsible for paying to a resident any sum by way of consideration, not being consideration in kind. So this is important, not being consideration in kind. It is only talking of consideration in cash under the agreement referred to in subsection 5A of section 45. So the section also refers to a registered agreement, registered joint development agreement under 45(5)(a) for even 194 IC to trigger, shall at the time of credit of such sum to the account of the payee or at the time of payment thereof in cash by issue of a check or draft or by any other mode, whichever is earlier, deduct an amount equal to 10% of such sum as income tax thereon. Let's take an example. Under a JDA, a developer agrees to pay the following sums to the landowners. There is a monthly rental of 10,000 rupees, a lump sum consideration of 15 lakhs, and there is a new apartment given against old apartment. Under 194 IC, going by the wordings of the section, the withholding should apply not only on the rental of 10,000 but also on the lump sum consideration or lump sum compensation paid to the landowners. There are some aspects which we should keep in mind for 45(5)(a). Charge of tax versus date of transfer. Now 45(5)(a) only defers taxability. But so far as transfer is concerned, the transfer should still be looked at in accordance with definition of transfer under section 247. So whether section 45(5)(a) only defers the time of taxation to the year of issuance of a completion certificate and does not defer the date of transfer, answer is yes. The transfer remains the date of transfer as arrived at under applicability of section 247. The consequence of that would be the second point, which is indexation. So indexation explanation 3 to section 48 refers to the date of transfer or year of transfer. So indexation would stop when the transfer is triggered. Only consideration is tagged to the year of taxability. So only payment of tax and chargeability of capital gains is in the year in which completion certificate is received. But so far as indexation is concerned, the year of transfer will be the year of a year when the indexation benefit will stop. Taxability when part share is transferred, year of transfer or part share or year of transfer under 247. So again, when part share is transferred, the whatever is the year of transfer under section 247, that is the year of taxability. Benefit of deferment is not available. The 45(5)(a), as we discussed, is not applicable if the contract is only revenue sharing arrangement and where no area is received by the landowner. Now let's look at the other set of scenario, which is the second box. Landowner is an assessee other than individual HUF, and the benefit of 45(5)(a) is not available. So we'll go by general principles of 247, general principles of what is a transfer. And this is very important because here is when we will examine all the elements covered under section 247 to see what is the trigger event for transfer under section 247. So for example, whether on entering into JDA or allowing possession to developer or giving license to construct or receiving possession of developed area. This is where I think this Supreme Court judgment of Sesashai Steels is very important. This in a way is a landmark judgment because it lays down a lot of important principles of how a definition of transfer should be interpreted. Although this judgment was rendered in the context of a case which was against assessee, because let me come to the details of this case. So the facts of the case are Sesha Shai Steels Private Limited entered into an agreement to sell with a buyer in financial year 98-99 for sale of land. The facts are very important. Agreement to sell gave permission to the buyer to start construction on the land and to undertake advertising and selling. This judgment has put a lot of emphasis on facts. A lot of emphasis has been put on how events are unfolding and what are the implications of those events. A license was given to the buyer upon the land for developing the land into flats. Pursuant to agreement to sell, a power of attorney was also executed in favor of a buyer. Power of attorney allowed the buyer to present necessary documents before authorities to undertake development and sale of the land. Subsequently, in financial year 2003-4, a compromise deed was executed for complete extinguishment of rights of seller upon payment of two installments which were pending. No return of income was filed by seller in financial year 2003-4. Department claimed that transfer was made in 2003-4, whereas the assessee claimed that transfer was made in 98-99. The matter was subsequently in 2008-9, a notice was issued under section 148 for reopening of this case, and this is where the entire litigation started. Now let us look at the contentions of the department. The department contended that terms recorded in agreement to sell do not contemplate compliance with conditions of section 247(5) of the act. Lack of intent on part of both the parties to perform their part of obligations. Accordingly, section 53A of Transfer of Property Act does not get attracted. The compromise deed is the only document which completely extinguishes the rights of the seller in the land upon complete discharge of consideration by buyer. Whereas the assessee contended that section 247(5) was attracted on execution of agreement to sell, which is our common understanding that the moment we enter into an agreement to sell, it is the event leading to taxability of capital gains. Agreement to sell and power of attorney enabled buyer to enjoy and deal with the land, resulting in transfer as per section 247(6). So they also, assessee also went on to say that section 247(6) also gets satisfied. We'll look at those provisions. And compromise deed does not result into any transfer under 247. It was just a formality. Transfer was already triggered under the earlier events. Now, before we come here, I think it's important, before we go to Supreme Court ruling, I think it's important that we look at the specific provisions, relevant provisions of section 247. Section 247 says transfer in relation to a capital asset includes any transaction involving the allowing of the possession, important word is possession, of any immovable property to be taken or retained in part performance of a contract of the nature referred to in section 53A of the Transfer of Property Act. So the key conditions for a transaction to attract transfer under 247(5) is there has to be a possession, there has to be a promise to perform, and the conditions under 53A of Transfer of Property Act have to be satisfied. But the key element is possession. Now, what is possession? Supreme Court here says possession is a legal concept. It denotes control over the land and not just physical occupation of the land. The agreement to sell in the subject matter only granted license to a buyer. That license is not akin to possession. Possession, according to the Supreme Court, is a much larger and wider concept as against a mere license. In absence of Section 53A satisfaction, because the Supreme Court observed, if you look at the first bullet, 53A are attracted if the following conditions are satisfied. Buyer must, in part performance of the contract, have taken possession of the property, and buyer must have performed or to be willing to perform his part of agreement. So the Supreme Court observed that the possession in the instant case was not possession in the eyes of the law. According to Section 53A of the Transfer of Property Act, it was merely a license, and accordingly 53A was not satisfied. So Section 247(5), limb of transfer, was not retracted. Now coming to the second limb, which is any transaction, blah blah blah, which has the effect of transferring or enabling the enjoyment of any immobile property. So the assessee argued that I had already transferred, in accordance with 247(6), the property in the capital asset. Whereas the Supreme Court observed that term enjoyment refers to enjoyment in the capacity of a purported owner. Expression enabling the enjoyment must take color from the earlier expression transferring, in which, according to the Supreme Court, was done when the compromise deed was executed, all the performances on the part of both the parties were dealt with, completed, and payment was completed. It was the compromise deed which effectively transferred possession and allowed enjoying the property to the buyer, and accordingly it was the compromise deed which effectuated transfer under Section 247. So this, coming here, this judgment, why it is important, and let's take a few examples here, why this judgment lays down important principles, because we have conventionally been talking of agreement to sell as a trigger point of 247 and taxability of capital gains. But what this judgment lays down is that no, it is not agreement to sell. There are quite a few other conditions which also have to be looked into before deciding whether a transaction in essence results into transfer. For example, if there is any performance pending on the sides of the pending on the side of the seller, pending on the side of the buyer, if the possession does not include, or possession is not in the eyes of the law a possession which gives rights equivalent of an owner to a buyer, then it is not really transfer under 247, even if agreement to sell is entered into. So here, I think, going forward, the documentation, although this judgment, as I said, was used by department to reopen a case and levy capital gain, is going to be used extensively to ensure that capital gains are taxed at an appropriate time, and capital gains, in a sense, are optimized, because a lot of it now, hello, yeah, a
Yeah,
lot
you
of,
can continue. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of it now depends on how the terms between the buyer and the seller are agreed. So I think this judgment is going to be of immense importance in any real estate transaction going forward. This is what we discussed, general principles on determining date of transfer. So transfer of possession with control is an essential ingredient for invoking transfer. If terms of agreement suggest that landowner has allowed right to developer that collectively allowed transfer of control of land, then agreement itself may be date of transfer. Merely giving license to enter plot for limited purpose of development without transferring control of plot is not a transfer. Giving power of attorney to developer with limited rights will automatically lead to transfer. If subsequently the transaction has will not automatically lead to transfer, I'm sorry, And if subsequently the transaction has gone through, then one can argue that possession was never transferred. Taxability is fact sensitive and it could lead to litigations in future. These are the provisions of 53A we've already discussed. Now coming to the third limb, the third basket, where the asset, capital asset, is converted into stock in trade. Let's look at 247 limb 4. Transfer in relation to a capital asset includes in a case where asset is converted by the owner thereof into or is treated by him as stock in trade of a business carried on by him, such conversion or treatment. What it means is section 247 deems the action of conversion of a capital asset into stock in trade as a transfer. And why this is important is we do not have to then look at other conditions that we discussed. Unlike 247.5, where transfer would be dependent on conditions to be satisfied under Transfer of Property Act conditions. Here, assessee merely taking an action of converting a capital asset into stock in trade in itself is an event of transfer. Now coming to section 45.2, the charging section. Notwithstanding anything contained in subsection 1, the profits or gains arising from the transfer by way of conversion by the owner of a capital asset into or its treatment by him as stock in trade of a business carried on by him shall be chargeable to income tax as his income of the previous year in which such stock in trade is sold or otherwise transferred by him. So what it means is the taxability is in the year in which the stock in trade is sold or otherwise transferred. And for the purpose of section 48, the fair market value of the asset on the date of such conversion or treatment shall be deemed to be full value of consideration. Now let's look at an example. Before that, there is one more point which we should discuss: whether it is possible to claim indexation till conversion in stock in trade or disposal of stock in trade. We looked at the section, the taxability, the transfer is when the event, when the event of transfer is when the capital asset is converted into stock in trade. It is only the taxability which is deferred to the point of time when the stock in trade is eventually sold or disposed of. There are divergent views available. There are contrary judgments available on both sides. So this is again a matter of litigation. Let's take an illustration here. Suppose Mr. A owns a land as capital asset whose cost of acquisition of land is 10 rupees and stamp duty value is 100. Mr. A converts the land into stock in trade in year 0 and records the land as stock in trade in the books at 100. So conversion of capital asset into stock in trade should result into capital gains.
lecture હતો આરા online
Request you to please mute Jignesh bhai. Yeah, Rutul bhai can continue.
Yeah. Sorry. So conversion of a capital asset into stock in trade should result into capital gains of 90 subject to indexation if any under 45.2 read with 247, only payable at the time when such land is sold. Now let's go further. In year 3, Mr. A enters into a JDA with a real estate developer for development of residential units on land. Now let's take an assumption that stamp duty value of land as on the date of entering into JDA is 300. And let's go further. The land is now already sitting as inventory for Mr. A. So in accordance with section 28, read with section 43 CA, entering into a JDA should in itself result into business profit of 200, which is 300 less 100. However, recognition of business profit should depend on the accounting principles adopted in the terms of JDA. Now, there is one very interesting concept here. Definition of transfer under 247 is only with respect to capital asset. If we look at here, transfer in relation to a capital asset. So once an asset is converted into inventory, then it goes out of the purview of section 247, and accordingly definition of transfer for the purpose of section 43 CA should be read with reference to Sale of Goods Act, which would mean that the conditions to be examined are whether significant risk and reward in the property are transferred or not transferred. If they are, the Mr. A should record a business revenue of 200. And accordingly, Mr. A may also be liable to discharge tax on capital gains of rupees 90 under section 45(2), because now the inventory is transferred or otherwise disposed of. Now let's go further. In year 5, Mr. A sells the residential units for 500. Then Mr. A will be again liable to pay tax on business profits of rupees 200, 500 less 300. This is a summary tax matrix for a landowner. First is 45 5A cases, registered joint development agreement. Second are conversion into stock in trade cases, and third are other regular cases. So first is timing of transfer. Timing of transfer is would depend on the terms of JDA. We discussed Seshashahi. Now for anything to do with transfer under section 247, I think the facts of a transaction, the terms of the agreement in light of Seshashahi steels would determine when the transfer would trigger under 247. But under 45(2), it is specifically provided under the section that transfer would be on conversion into stock in trade. In other cases, again, it would depend on the terms of joint development agreement. Tax payment. The payment of taxes would be in the year in which, for a 45 5A cases, registered joint development agreement would be in the year of issue of completion certificate. For 45(2), on receipt of units against transfer of inventory. So basically it is transfer of inventory. And in other cases, immediately upon transfer as per JDA, moment conditions under 247 are triggered, there is a tax liability. What is a full value of consideration? Under 45 5A, stamp duty value of an area share on the date of issue of completion certificate plus cash consideration is a total consideration. Under 45(2), stock in trade, conversion into stock in trade, fair market value of land on the date of conversion is the full value of consideration. And for all other cases, it is higher of the amount received or 50C value. Indexation. Indexation is up to transfer for 45 5A and all other cases, and in stock in trade conversion, because the transfer is linked to conversion, it is up to conversion. Coming to section 50C now, it's 12 now. Maybe I'll quickly summarize 50C and 43C, and then maybe we can look at the questions. Harit bhai, is that okay?
Yes, Vidul. Yes.
Yeah, okay. So 50C is applicable where consideration received upon transfer of a capital asset, being land or building or both, is less than stamp duty value. Then stamp duty value will be deemed to be full value of consideration received as a result of such transfer. Further, where date of agreement fixing amount of consideration and date of registration for transfer of a capital asset are different, value adopted for stamp duty purpose on the date of agreement to be deemed as full value of consideration. We're all aware of this. There is a tolerance limit of 10% given. There are two important points here. One is for the purpose of claiming exemption under 54, 54 EC, etc. Whether exemption provision should apply first and then section 50C should apply, or vice versa. We again have divergent views by Karnataka and Mumbai Tribunal. Again, we don't have Supreme Court here, so we don't have a clarity on this aspect. These are some of the, based on judicial precedents, whether section 50C is applicable on some of these items is summarized. Let's say land and building is very clear. Leasehold rights, Uh, the answer is no. Leasehold rights do not fall under the purview of 50C. Depreciable building, answer is yes. That again, because 50C talks about building, so land, building, or both. So answer is yes. Development rights, yes. Uh, Development rights, we also have a contrary judgment by Bangalore Tribunal, which says no. Transfer of shares in a company owning an apartment, obviously no, because we are talking of a company. Again, the same thing could apply to development rights, but because development right also, we have a view that development right is a movable asset, but there again, because of that reason, we have a contrary judgment there. For a company, we have a view that that's not 50C should not apply. Introduction of land or building as capital by a partner, again, answer is no. And land and building as stock in trade, answer is no, but of course 43CA should apply. Coming to 43CA is a similar section, but for inventory. Only thing here we should know is Finance Bill 2021 has proposed to extend safe harbor limit from 10% to 20% upon fulfillment of conditions, and basically this is a condition for to incentivize small house buyers. Lastly, let's briefly talk about affordable housing. Affordable housing is 100% deduction of profit. The reason I thought we should talk about this is because recently the budget has proposed an extension of 1 year here. So we thought we should cover this. 100% deduction of profits derived from business of developing and building housing projects is eligible as a tax holiday. Housing project to consist predominantly of residential units, and the deduction is subject to these conditions. Project must be approved before 31st March now 2022, which is proposed to be completed within 5 years. Commercial or shops should not exceed 3%. Project to be the only housing project on a plot of land. Stamp value of a residential unit should not exceed 45 lakhs, and other ancillary conditions to be satisfied. Few points here: whether deduction available qua business or qua project, answer seems it is qua project. Assessee may not be the owner of the land, precedents available in the context of 80IB 10. More than one project, including non-housing on a large piece of land, looks difficult because the section clearly says the project is the only project on the plot of land. Consequences of non-fulfillment of conditions other than completion deadline, section is silent. We may presume that violation of other condition may not take away benefit, but this has to be tested. Coming to questions. So before I come to questions, let me conclude by saying that I think redevelopment is going to be very important and going to be adopted widely, whether it is government projects or whether it is society redevelopment projects or whether it is joint development projects. The reasons are one of the key reasons is it creates a win-win situation where the developer does not have to shell out a sizable cash flow on acquisition of land. Also, joint development agreement qua society projects creates a win-win for the house owners. They get a better property, and for government it creates a win-win because government is able to provide better infrastructure to slums, and real estate developer in lieu of that also gets a piece of land to develop. Now there are some nuances here where the land is not transferred, the land is given on a long-term lease, how that should be accounted for, what should be the method of accounting, percentage of completion, completed contract, if there is a subcontract, how that subcontract should be dealt with. But I think uh, in substance, a redevelopment model, the key question that needs to be answered is on the project itself, which we discussed, whether the same needs to be accounted as inventory or a different project model, and accordingly the profit at the point of time when the profits needs to be recorded. So this is some in summary of how redevelopment broadly works. Going to specific questions, I think we have these questions. I also had a few sections on FEMA, but I think in the interest of time, I would rather straight away go to questions. First is, as a developer, how will my cost be calculated? What all details to be considered in the cost of project, demolition cost, rent to old owners, etc. I think guidance note has provided a clarity on these aspects. I believe these are direct expenses. Even if we go to accounting standard or Ind AS, I think these are direct business expenses which a developer should be eligible or should be allowed to show as project cost, project expense. And the details are regular details of the project cost which are required to be maintained. But I believe my view, demolition cost, rent to old owners, I think these are all part of the project cost. Second is, how is profit to be calculated for each year? Is it calculated on per square foot basis, or for entire project? Can we have separate costing for shops since their selling price is also higher, and for apartments? I think what we discussed is the project cost and the profitability have to be based on the method of accounting. The method of accounting does not really distinguish between a differential costing for a commercial shop and a differential costing for a shop. As and when the project revenues are anticipated and project costs are incurred, depending on the method of accounting, they have to be accounted for. What all precautions, and when we go to last questions, maybe we'll discuss on that as well. What all precautions to be taken while executing the sale deed? I think it's not the sale deed. I would reframe this question to say what all uh, precautions to be taken in drafting drafting an agreement which in a way ensures that section 247 conditions are met with and they are satisfied at a desired point of time. So I think that's something very, very relevant. We discussed about that, and I think that's going to be the key. We still have an option to go for completed sale method, as ICDS on real estate is not effective. Now, let me elaborate here. If we look at ICDS, we have ICDS, we have a draft ICDS on real estate, but ICDS on real estate is not in place. But we have an ICDS on revenue recognition. Then we have a guidance note. Then we have Indian accounting standard. If we go to ICDS on revenue recognition, and we also have section 145.1 and 145.2. 145.1 is now subject to 145.2. Now let's look at this. Let's look at a scenario where I were to argue that revenue, in absence of ICDS for real estate, I have to go by general ICDS on revenue recognition. If I go by general ICDS on revenue recognition, there are two concepts: sale of goods and service contract. If it is sale of goods, I have to see whether significant risk and rewards are transferred or not. The point at which revenue is to be recognized is when significant risk and rewards are transferred. So that means I have to keep on accumulating my cost, and a moment significant risk and reward qua a unit are transferred to a buyer, I would recognize revenue. But let's say it is taken as service revenue because there is significant risk and reward are not transferred. The color of the contract, the nature of the contract is such that enables a developer to characterize that as a service revenue. Then I think going by the guidance note, going by the accounting principle, it should be percentage of completion. But I think this is an area where a lot needs to be done. again Ind AS 115 coming into picture, the dynamics are going to change. And we have to see as and when real estate ICDS gets effective. But this question often comes into consideration, whether if a method of accounting, which could be percentage of completion, which is consistently followed under 145(1), do I really have to go to ICDS for revenue recognition or not? And that has been a matter of debate. So with that, I think I have actually taken 15 more minutes, but I think I've with that I come to conclusion of this presentation.
Uh, Thank you, Rutul. I think I just one thing I wanted to ask regarding this. You said that the rent the builder pays to the flat owners when
Yeah.
they go for the redevelopment. You said there is no TDS under 194I,
Yes.
but there will be TDS under 194IC then,
Correct. Yeah, we discussed about it, right? So there
right?
is,
So
yeah, there is a TDS under 194 IC because
okay,
it is a compensation to flat owners.
okay, and I think there are just quick questions from the members in the chat box. If you have time, we can take it. Otherwise, I'll message you. You can reply in the group later on, as is convenient with
That'll
you,
be
Rutul.
nice. That'll be nice. We can do that way because you sent those questions to me, so I thought I'll cover those questions. But maybe we
Yeah.
can, if there are additional questions now or even afterwards, I can take those questions. You can send those questions to me, and I'll be happy to take those questions.
Okay, Rutul. So I'll compile it and send it to you. Thank you so much, Rutul, for your time. I understand you have a meeting lined up. So thank you so much for your time, and we look forward to having you personally also at Ahmedabad branch physically when things
Absolutely.
get
My
normalized.
pleasure. My
Thank
pleasure.
you. Thank you so much, Rutul. And all the members, please send your queries if you have to me, and we will compile and send it to Rutul bhai. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
નહીં, નહીં.